So, everyone, welcome to the Foster podcast. My name is Lyle, and I have Girish Gupta joining us today, who is a former freelance investigative journalist and currently working on Memoir book project. I met you through the On Deck writing program and saw a talk that you did there and thought it would be really fun to talk to you here as well. So maybe we can start. You can maybe take us back. You went from growing up in, I think it's pronounced Slough, perhaps.
It's Slough.
Slough. Okay.
Slough or whatever.
I know. So you grew up in Slough, and which was the setting for The Office. Then you went from there to studying physics, and then programming and stuff like that. And then you got into writing, which seems like a very unlikely path. Curious, when did you realize that you wanted to pursue a career in journalism? Maybe take us through that path.
Great, thank you. So that's a great question. So my sort of background is not traditional journalist at all. It's very much physics, programming, technical, and those things I very much still care about and enjoy. But towards the end of university, I just finished up I was during my master's year actually, and I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world, and I'd read a lot of journalism. I'd sort of taken in a lot of journalism after 9/11, especially in 2001. I started watching CNN, reading Time magazine, that sort of thing. And just found it fascinating. I was learning so much. And I saw journalism as a great way to see the world, to understand the world, and maybe make a difference to the world, to bring things to light. It all sounds very sort of big picture and poetic now, but that was sort of my idea. But ultimately, I just wanted to go somewhere and see the world and travel. Something that sort of really came from my mum. She had a difficult background. Her own childhood was tough, and she wasn't really able to travel, but really wanted to. So when we did, we didn't go to trips into Europe or around England so much. We went to Dubai when it was still very sandy, Koh Samui when it was a tiny island. The airport the size of this room. And that was wonderful. And that was once every few years. It wasn't every year, of course. It's so much more expensive to go there than, say, France. But that really sort of gave me this idea of, or helped me, or basically want to see the world like she had. And so I felt foreign correspondence and journalism was a way to do that. And it's interesting you say writer, because I sort of struggle with that word. I've never really thought of myself as a writer. Even as a journalist, I wasn't a writer. I feel, obviously that's wrong in many ways. I'm just wrong in suggesting that, but that's certainly how I felt. So what I did, so the last couple of years of university, my master's years, I started I started working at the student newspaper and just sort of doing small stories, small little investigations using things like the Freedom of Information Act, which I have in the US as well, to get documents and so on from government. And pitching these to news outlets in the UK. It's also a good way to make money because to do this sort of thing, you need money because it doesn't pay particularly well. So I would do that, and I sort of did a couple of internships at the Guardian, the Times of London, a couple other places, Reuters, of course. I just sort of tried to understand how it worked. And there were essentially two schools of thought. One was do a degree, do a master's degree, say in journalism from City University in London or Columbia in New York. And that's what a lot of people, for example, at The Guardian said when I spoke to them about it. And I sort of got the impression, okay, well, I don't really want to, I think I want to do that. First, it's another year or two of study. It's a hell of a lot of money. Especially in New York, it's serious money, $100,000 plus. But also what grabbed me was a lot of the people who were telling me to do that weren't actually doing foreign correspondence or hadn't done foreign correspondence. And they just sort of thought that was the way in. And then when I spoke to a lot of people at Reuters, they said, well, just jump on a plane. You need to be somewhere foreign to do this. And that's what I did. I jumped on a plane to Mexico. And sorry, just to answer your question, the sort of more big picture question is why physics to journalism? I think that was the crux of the question. Ultimately, it's not, they're not the same thing, and it is a job. I can't pretend it's not, but there is something in them. Both of them, they're both about curiosity. I love physics because it lets you understand the world. It helps you actually deeply understand things, how they work, why they're happening, what's going on. And journalism, I think, is the same in many ways. It's a very different type of reality that you're understanding, from how space and time work, at their most fundamental to why there is a conflict in some country. There are very different things, but the fundamental human desire to understand and curiosity are the same. And ultimately as well, they're both ideally, and I know this isn't the case always in practice, but ideally they're about finding things out without bias and with complete objectivity. So I do think having studied physics is a good path into journalism. It's not just because, the obvious, it meant I can understand percentages or have a better take on, COVID statistics. Obviously, yes, the numerical stuff did help, but that's not why it's really awesome. It's those analytical skills, the ability to really be objective, to separate, what I want, what I know, what I don't know, of course, and what is actually happening. So I felt it was quite natural in a way, but of course it's not, it's not the common path in. So yeah, then I jumped on a plane to Mexico, and I relentlessly would pitch stories to a few handful of foreigners that I'd met. One of the most prominent and kind, actually, both prominent and kind, which is nice to have together, was Richard Easton at the Times of London, who I'd met on my internship. And he was great. And when I'd met him for a quick 15-minute chat, he got me, I think, in a way that even I didn't realize. And I would have realized for a few months, if not years, but he basically understood what I needed to know and said, look, Girish, just keep pitching to us. And he gave me advice on money, which was important. I didn't realize quite how important at the time. He said, I've never looked down on people who sell to tabloids, that do the same story for multiple people, that sort of thing. At that point, I didn't quite understand it. And okay, well, note it down and get going somewhere then. And then I would pitch to him relentlessly in Mexico, utter crap, a lot of it. Some of these stories I was pitching were clearly not big enough or important enough for, the 6 pages or so that they have in the newspaper, foreign news. But he was very generous. He got me and said, okay, that's good, Girish. We won't take this one, but keep pitching. And I just write the whole story because I had nothing else to do when I got to Mexico. So I'd write the whole story that they didn't know I could write, and in fact, I couldn't. And I obviously got to learn about Mexico, got to learn Spanish a little bit, and so on. And then eventually, I pitched a little story about some young assassin, a 14-year-old kid, in this horrible drug war that was going on then. And it was just a rewrite of basically Associated Press and Reuters. There was nothing particularly special about it. I barely spoke Spanish enough to read the local news reports, let alone verify them. But I pitched this 200-word piece, and they took it. And it was all written from my tiny, very cheap bedroom in Mexico City. So there's no real reporting there at all. But they took it, and that was my first byline, as a foreign correspondent. But I was self-aware enough to know that, hey, I could have done this sitting in London. I've not really added anything here by being in Mexico. So I wanted to up my game a little bit, and I said to Richard, look, this kid, he's from a place called Cuernavaca. It's a few hours south of here. Could I go there and just see what I can find? Maybe speak to his teachers, his friends, whatever. And he said, yeah, go for it. And I thought, can I borrow $250, please? Because it cost money. I didn't have much money at the time, and news outlets don't tend to pay particularly quickly, and so on. So cash flow was an issue. And he said, okay, yes, here you go. And he was good about it. And obviously, looking back, I should have saved up more. I should have understood more. I should have known more about Mexico. I should have known more about the world. Had I done that, I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. So maybe it's good that I was ignorant at the time. So he lent me some money, and I got down there, and yeah, I mean, it was completely ridiculous in many ways. I eventually found the sister of the judge in the case through random phone calls, completely random phone calls. She happened to speak English, and the Spanish speaker put me through to her because she didn't understand me, basically. But it turned out this was the sister of the judge, so that was a great way in. I spoke to a couple of people who knew a little bit more about this kid. And I wrote my story, and it wasn't anything amazing, but at least I'd gone somewhere and reported. And this actually turns into the title of the memoir that we'll talk about, which is Always Go. And that's a real maxim, I think, for good foreign correspondence, is that you've got to always go. If I hadn't gone to Cuernavaca, who knows what I'd been doing? Keep writing rewrites in my Mexico City bedroom. So yeah, I wrote this piece, and they loved it. And it was on the front page of the World section, and I was really proud of that because it was actual reporting. I'd gone somewhere and I'd reported something, wasn't amazing reporting. I'd not really unearthed anything that deep. It was sort of sensational. Look at this kid. But I spoke to people that other journalists hadn't spoken to, and revealed something a little bit more exciting than just what was on the AP or Reuters quick stories. So yeah, so I was very proud of that. He was very happy, and then he's just like, I give Venezuela a go. He said, why don't you? We need somebody in Venezuela right now. Looks like it could be an interesting story for you. Do you want to head down there?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love the idea of just almost like you wouldn't have done it without some of the naivety to go,
Absolutely.
you know. I think a lot of people could probably relate to that, of like having that beginner's mindset in other fields,
Yeah.
when you go maybe try something you wouldn't have if you had known something,
Yeah.
beforehand. Well, it kind of leads to a question I was going to ask later, but I think it ties in nicely, whereas like kind of knowing what you do now, like, would you have done done it again,
Oh, that's such a great question. That's a really great question. I guess when I give advice to people who are at my spot now, so the spot I was on then at then now, that's what I should really be thinking about. And I sort of tell them what I did and how it works and how it can work for them. And of course, ultimately they've got to make a decision. Would I do it right now? I'd say, like, let's say I hadn't had that career as a journalist the last 10 years. Absolutely not. It's absurd. I made no money. I had no money. I had no idea what I was doing. There's nothing stable about it. And now I'm very happily living in San Francisco with my wife. So absolutely not. So the ignorance really did, and the naivety really did pay off. And I think, obviously, I wasn't mature enough to know all of this at the time. But one thing I think I was mature enough to know was, in the future, I will not be able to do this. Now is the time that I can jump on a plane, go and live in an apartment that costs $150 a month or whatever it was. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, I can go back to England, I can go to wherever. And I've got a master's degree in physics. It's not like I'm unemployable. If anything, that was the best sort of mattress I had to lie on. That allowed me to take great risks when that's me as a journalist because I had that bedrock. So no, absolutely not. I wouldn't go now at the age of 34. Should a 22-year-old or 24-year-old go and do that? If there's not a big answer to why not, I think yeah. I think it's a wonderful thing to have done, and to take that risk at that age is great, and it did pay off for me. It doesn't always pay off, and it could very easily not have done. Had I stayed in Mexico, had I not gone to Venezuela, had I not met Richard Easton, had so many little things not happened, had I not pitched that story about going to Cuernavaca, then maybe I would have come back to the UK in 6 months, 6 months later, and got a job somewhere. So it's a difficult question, but yeah, right now I wouldn't do that. It's also because I've done that. Maybe had I not done that, I'd be now raring to do something like that, and it would, I'd end up throwing away my marriage and everything else. So it's a really tough one. It's sort of time, place, and the luck I have.
Totally. Yeah. I also wonder, this kind of ties into, you just published, so for those on the call, he's been writing a memoir. We'll get into that in a little bit, but, and sharing pieces of it on his Substack newsletter called Always Go. But you shared a piece just today, about kind of I would say, like, stark economics of freelance journalism. And you shared some important lessons and tricks that kind of helped you make it work.
Yeah.
So maybe you can take us through that a little bit, but I also wonder, kind of a corollary, you sort of paint a bit of a bad state of affairs, right? And imagine that you came into it probably as many other reporters do, with this sort of like idealistic point of view of like, I'm going to do hardcore, impactful reporting, but instead you were trying to figure out how to like get food on the table, So I'd be curious to kind of take us through that.
Absolutely. And that was really tough. So I realized this, the whole money side of journalism wasn't working at all. Firstly, the unpaid internships, which is a pretty obvious issue and White House issue. Obviously, having to live in London or New York and not being paid to do so is problematic. But even when I got abroad, the pay I was getting, and we're now in Venezuela, and the great thing about Venezuela was this. So just to give it context, I was in Venezuela. I landed there in 2011. Hugo Chavez would die in 2013. I then, for the next 5 years, covered this pretty incredible humanitarian crisis that just got worse and worse and worse. So I arrived in Venezuela, and there were a few other freelance journalists there, which was great for me. It allowed me to really grab the market. But one thing I realized was the money just wasn't sustainable. It just, you're getting maybe the ballpark figures, but there's maybe $250 for 800 words. Now, I think the concept of paying per word is absurd. I mean, it's just, obviously 800 words can be written. It can take a year to produce, a year and 10 flights to then, and hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce 800 words. Or it can take, half an hour in the Brooklyn bedroom. If it's like an opinion piece or something, there are very different costs involved in that. But that's what really dealt with. And obviously I was on the sort of more expensive end of that by living in a foreign country and so on. And actually going out to do reporting. So that sort of $250 for 800 words, or maybe $100 a day from the New York Times or something. It wasn't enough, and I didn't really know how to deal with that. But I had this lovely chat, which I write about in the book, with a Reuters bureau chief, Andy, who was wonderful in many ways, and he basically gave me the hack to make this work, which I just hadn't realized before. And he said, look, when you go on a story, whether it's for us or somebody else, and if we're paying expenses, then that's great. If we're not, obviously you need to make even more money. Make sure you do that story for multiple news outlets. And I initially thought, well, hang on, that's surely a bit tricky. If I have this in Reuters and Time Magazine and New York Times, well, then that's surely a problem. And he said, well, yeah, it is, but none of them are paying you enough to make it worthwhile. If your story costs $2,000 and they're all paying $300, and maybe one of them throws $100 expenses, there's no way you can make that work. Obviously, change the quotes around. Don't use literally the same words. Change the angle and so on. But that's okay. You should be doing that. Okay, I thought that was very interesting, and I hadn't really considered that in a way. It's very naive of me not to. I could clearly see the math wasn't going to work out. So he helped me with that, and also gave me the confidence to do that, because it wasn't just a random person saying this. It was the Reuters bureau chief who was also paying for me to go on some of these trips. So he was saying, we're paying all your expenses for this, which was great and very rare. Make sure you do this for other people, which was really wonderful, because he was very aware that Reuters were not paying me enough to do this work. And that's very rare in this. I mean, that's, worked with 50 different news outlets, probably half a dozen really got that and empathize with me on that point. Another thing you said was, if someone does offer you expenses, don't just get the expenses you need. Get more, charge 3 people for the flights, charge whatever, because none of them are really paying enough. And again, it felt a bit cheap, but of course, the cheeky thing was how much they were paying and what they were expecting in return. So I did that, and I really, I saw in my background is physics, and it was a formula, and I got the formula, I understood the formula, and I just pushed it to its extremes. And I was, on top of that, I did lots of video work and photography and radio work. So at my sort of peak, as it were, in early, I was doing the same thing. I maybe write the story 4 times for 4 different news outlets, do a couple of radio versions, do video versions, sell photos as well. And then suddenly you've not only made back the money you've spent, you've earned a good chunk of money for the time you spent on it, which is sustainable. And it's that magic word which makes it continuable, which is really a word, but able to be continued, which is so important. And that's something I hadn't really considered beforehand. I became very good at the business side of it. There are other issues as well. Something I write about too is no one paid on time. And that was a big problem. So as I said, I had to borrow $250 from Richard at the Times for that first Cuernavaca trip. I did not have great cash flow at this point. And if someone pays me, needs to pay me $1,000 and I get it 3 months late, that was a huge problem. And again, initially I'd steal it. I'd be angry. I'd be emotional. I'd be saying, I need to pay rent this month. I need to get food. I need to, and of course that didn't really work. And so what I looked for the law in the UK, which is most of my clients are in the UK at this point. And actually you can find somebody for not paying you within 30 days of an invoice. And that's obviously good for small businesses and so on. It's not something journalists often did. But I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, let's just implement that and be very calm about it, be very professional about it. No need to be not nice, but also no need to be too nice. It's just, this is the language that was my invoice. it's up to you if you want to pay overtime or not. But these are the consequences. And it worked. It works great. So you can find $60 for an invoice if it's paid up to 30 days. I had to a few times, and broadly, well, I mean, everyone did pay up in the end, and the couple that refused to pay up, I had to then actually follow through, and that was very easy. With the small claims calls in the UK, it takes 10 minutes, and then you get your money, of course. So it was a shame to have to do that. And the big picture here is that it's such a shame that I had all this enthusiasm to do great journalism, but was having to focus my energies on, okay, well, how do I get that other $250? Oh, they said they'd pay me that, but they haven't. And then having to go through sort of the emotional stress of learning all this and dealing with editors who weren't as friendly as Andy was, and didn't see. I mean, one of them said to me, "I can't believe you're relying on our payments for your living expenses." Well, of course I am. That's what pay is, right? I mean, we do jobs and we earn money in those to and even if we did it, that's up to me. The black and white issue is that you owe me money and I haven't got it. So that was really difficult to get through, and I did. I found ways around that, but this is a serious issue in journalism. That there are obviously money problems higher up in the journalism industry, and they do need to be addressed. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But this attitude that so many editors had was that, well, surely you don't actually need this money. I remember the Financial Times paid $50 for a piece, for a 300-400 word piece, and then paid that late. It was absurd. I mean, this isn't sustainable at all for any of us, surely. So yeah, that was problematic, and I'm glad I found a way out. I'm also glad I was in a place in Venezuela where there weren't other freelance journalists, because had there been 10 others who didn't kick up a fuss, basically get paid on time, maybe my career would have ended a few months in.
Yeah, there was couple lines that or parts that of your piece today that stuck out to me, where you said, like the big journalistic outlets have been taking advantage of the gig economy long before Uber and Lyft. Which I thought was an interesting thing. And it's true. Like, yeah, it seems like, yeah, not paying people on time and just sort of giving them the runaround and not paying them enough. But then the other thing that jumped out at me was where you said, I don't know if this is currently or was when you were in the midst of doing all the reporting and stuff, where you said the New York Times only had something like 3 reporters in all of Africa.
Yeah, so it's so the industry is so reliant on freelancers. It's unbelievably so. And this is why I actually warmed towards Reuters, the companies like the Associated Press and even Bloomberg, and to an extent the Wall Street Journal, but not so much. It's just that the Reuters has, a bunch of reporters basically in most countries, which is staff reporters who have all the benefits of being on staff. Whereas someone at the New York Times or Washington Post will have a very small handful of reporters on staff who essentially cover entire continent. Now, I lived in Venezuela for 8 years. I covered that, I think, well over 8 years. I got to know it. Certainly over the last few years, I got to really know it and understand it. There's no way I could have done that for a whole concert. No way at all. It's hard. It's complicated. And I don't even think one of the things I was thinking about writing a book was, can I write a book about Venezuela? No, I just don't know enough. And frankly, I know Venezuela fairly well. And this concept that one guy from New York who's just come off the metro desk can suddenly be covering 2/3 of Africa or the top half of South America is obviously absurd. And then of course you realize it's all streamers and freelancers and fixers and so on that are doing work for the sort of money that I've described.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's like, I imagine they're looking at it as like, oh, we have these freelancers, they're going to do one-offs here and there, and like, I would imagine the amount of freelancers that were doing it like you were doing it, or were a very, very low number that were actually like making a living doing that. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the problem. And remember, I mean, I wasn't worst off as well. At least I came from England. So, I had access to credit. I had access to an education at a good university and all those great things. I know a lot of including New York Times freelancers and so on, other news outlets as well, not just them, who, come from a slum in Venezuela, which is obviously not a place that has any of the privileges that I had. So they, were paid far less than I was as well. If you think numbers are low for me, they're even lower for them. And this is a big problem. The whole thing, I mean, this is why Uber and Lyft, well, I have great respect for them. You make your rates. I mean, they have a set rate and they pay it on time. And that's it. Obviously there are issues with the gig economy. But but it's so much better than what I experienced as a freelancer and what other people experience as freelancers, or fixers or stringers, all these other terms. They're even more lowly than the positions that I held.
God, so interesting. Um, so maybe we're about halfway done here, and then we could maybe shift. Well, first, you left journalism about 3 years ago, and you founded a company. So maybe you could like briefly tell us about that decision. And I'm curious, did the idea for the company arise from like the reporting or what
Absolutely.
you're doing there?
Yeah. So a quick overview. Venezuela went through this horrible economic crisis. People earning $1 a month, the currency just utterly collapsing because the currency controls were brought in 2003, so many years ago now, 20 years ago, um, and essentially the government couldn't satiate demand for dollars, for the importers, for business people, for people who want to travel, and so on. And so the currency just weakened and weakened and weakened on the black market over the years, especially during the years that I was in Venezuela, so between 2011 and 18. And we're talking real weakening. We're not just sort of saying, this is like Zimbabwe-esque weakening and therefore hyperinflation and all the problems that sort of thing brings. So as a journalist, I really wanted to get this stuff across to readers well. Now, I really wanted to understand the math because ultimately it's all black market exchange rates, money printing, and inflation. It's all numbers at the end of the day, which is great for me, and that's something I do understand. And I wanted to understand, draw graphs. And okay, what does this all mean? What does it mean when the spread between the black market rate and the official rate is X? What does that mean for a person on the ground? And then, of course, tell that story through speaking to people who were. I mean, it got worse and worse over the years. At the start, it was just somebody who was struggling to buy flour and having to stand in line for a couple of hours in the supermarket. And by the end of my time there, was people whose parents had died because they couldn't get basic wipes, let alone actual medicine in the hospital. It's really horrific, this problem, and smugglers and corrupt people and all these other things that are going on because of these numbers. What I started to realize was that a few people had sort of gone deeply into the numbers. It was very difficult to get hold of the numbers in a sort of systematic, structured way. And even through Reuters and Bloomberg and these big data companies, they still hired people to press professional websites rather than automate their ingestion of these numbers. So I wrote some code, some very, very basic codes, just to bring in a few data points: the black market exchange rate, the inflation figures, the official exchange rate, how much money was being printed every week, and so on. And to put it out, put it into a database, and then have it out on a graph and on a website. So just leave it there. And it became really, really popular because there was nowhere else to get that, and certainly not to get it live. So that was really wonderful for me to see that something I'd sort of taken the initiative to do just because I needed it was actually useful to other people. And then, I was enjoying journalism. I was working with Reuters at the time, and we're covering big protests. I was doing big investigations, which was all wonderful. And as a journalist or writer, that was a really wonderful experience. But there was also a part of me that was leaning away and into the more technical again. And I thought, hey, let's make this into an iPhone app. So I learned Swift and built an iPhone app. And then I realized that, of course, no one in Venezuela has iPhones because it's a very poor country. And so I built an Android app with Java and put those out. And it was wonderful. They were really popular because there's nowhere else to get this data. And it was lovely seeing, people go to a restaurant to see the person on the table next to me using my app to work out how much their meal was costing that day in dollar terms. So that was great. And I was really proud of it. So it was never a business. It was just a side project. It wasn't charging money or anything. But then maybe hastily in 2018, I thought, hey, you know what? I was getting tired of journalism, of Reuters, of journalism, of the industry, not so much not the ideal of journalism, but the industry of journalism. As I got sort of higher and higher up, I just realized, this isn't working. And that's sort of what my book is trying to grapple with. So I started this. So I thought, let's expand what I've done in Venezuela to the world, because it's not just Venezuela where it's hard to get data that should be public. Most countries in the world, it's a little bit of struggle. They have terrible PDFs, bad websites, Excel files that don't really tot up, and so on. So I put all this. So I wrote basically the same software and just expanded it, professionalized it, and turned it into a company, and built this really wonderful product, which I'm deeply proud of. But I made a mistake that a lot of technical founders, I think, made, just to build a wonderful product and then realized that the market doesn't really want it. And that, yes, I'd solved the problem, but it was a big problem in Venezuela, but sort of a small problem in the rest of the world. And you know what? If Reuters or Bloomberg gave me the data 20 minutes later, it didn't matter. They didn't need it. Split second timing, so I was offering. So that was interesting, listening startups. And, it's a story I tell now that I've been in San Francisco and they love the idea of a found startup. But so that was what I did. But then after that, I realized startup wasn't working. The market just didn't want what I was doing. And, it wasn't also that my passion wasn't open economic data at the end of the day. So I could have pivoted. I could have spent 5 years building another company out of it, but that wasn't quite what I wanted to do. Sadly though, I spent the next couple of years not really doing a lot. I was working, I was doing jobs that weren't quite doing it for me. They look good on the CV, but there wasn't any great professional success over the next couple of years. And then of course COVID hit. And then my wife and I moved to San Francisco a few months ago. And the idea, of course, was come to San Francisco. I'm finally in my element. I can go to tech, make billions of dollars, and we can live a happy life there. But what I started to realize was that my head was in a place that was wanting to close up that chapter in journalism and hadn't done that. And that's partly why I hadn't had any other success or moving forward, having left it. So I really wanted to do that. I didn't really know how to do that. And I'd emailed this writing coach who happened to be in Berkeley at the time, or was in Berkeley. And just saying, this is me, this is what I've done. And I feel I've got a book to write. I just don't really know what it is. I thought, is it a book about Venezuela? Is it a book about the crazy economics of Venezuela? Is it a memoir? I just don't know what it, but there's something in me. And she was great. And we spoke, and I still think even to this day, when I've written 100,000 words, she can describe the book better than I can. She knows much more what it's about than I do. But she's wonderful. And she said, okay, I know what the book is. It's basically the growth of this naive kid, in journalism, learning so much about the world, covering Venezuela, covering in the Middle East as well. I traveled all over the world for a long period, but based in Venezuela. And it's the growth of this kid. And he understands both the world and journalism better and better and better, but then realizes it's not quite what he thought it was or what he hoped it was. And that's the arc of the story, with obviously wonderful anecdotes from all these places and stories that I covered. And so I'd spent probably those 2 or 3 years beforehand. I'd written maybe 2,000 words of a 4 words to this book, or an introduction to this book, which just it was rubbish. It was, well, it in itself was good, but there was no book to tail it off. It was just a little essay about me. And then the first week I wrote 10,000 words, and it was chapter 1. The next week I wrote 8,000 words, it was chapter 2. And we just kept going like that, because clearly the book was in me. I just needed somebody to unlock and help structure what it was. And she's been really wonderful, because I sort of joke that she's like a therapist without any tact. I think if she'll draw these links, she's very keen that a memoir is about me. I mean, that's the point side, that's really frowned upon in journalism in a way, that to make it about you. And I never used the first person. I was a journalist for 8 years, not even on Twitter, let alone in actual articles. So I had to grapple with this as well. Simply say I was arrogant to write a book about myself. And I was thinking about it, well, actually, it's much more arrogant for me to write a book about something else. Because, if I were to write a book about Nile or a book about Venezuela, well, then it implies that I know enough about those things to write a book about them. Whereas the one thing I probably know better than other things is myself. Not perfectly, of course, and that's what we learn through therapy and all those things. But yeah, so I went ahead to this, and I made great progress. And I'm, now I'm 4 months in, and I'm 60-70% of the way through. I've written 100,000 words, or some, which will be cut, of course. And it's been the most wonderful process. It's been massively therapeutic. It's exactly what I needed. And how people talk about closing up chapters. I need to close this chapter of my life. Well, I literally do that in writing this. And there's been some things which, there was an Iraq trip I went on. I was in Iraq with Reuters for a little bit. It was a complete disaster in many ways, not because of Iraq, but because of Reuters. And it made me so angry. And I was so angered by it. So even 4 years later, when I thought about this, I was so angry about it. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to write it down. Let's go through everything. Let's go through all the emails, the messages, and so on. Just write it down. And I did. And that's it. it's done. It's the chapter is closed, literally, but also much more big picture. There have been other examples of this, and that's where I joke that the editor is sort of a semi-therapist. I'd sort of say something or explain how I did journalism, why I got annoyed about certain aspects of journalism. And just say, "Oh, Girish, isn't that related to, you told me your mum when your father had a difficult relationship, he was violent and she had to leave him. Do you think that's related?" Yes, you're right. It is. Let me think about that and weave that in. And actually, just the other day, we were writing quite a difficult chapter. It's quite an intense chapter. I was all over the place at the time, and I was writing about that. And obviously, I can be all over the place. The reader can't be all over the place. So it was a difficult thing to have me completely unstructured and not knowing what to do and flying all over and in different countries, but not get the reader lost. And at one point she said, "Oh, can you just finish this sentence, please?" And she typed, I could see what she was typing. She said, "Oh, I was not mature enough at that point to understand that. Can you finish the sentence, please?" So yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, let's finish that one. And it's great because it makes you think about it. It makes you understand it. It gets you to reflect. So in a way, even if no one ever reads this memoir, I don't care. It's been such a wonderful process for me to close these chapters and understand what happened. And I think, unlike with journalism, where I guess with journalism, it's much more top down. Even if you're on the ground and reporting it or to speak to people, I mean top down in a different way, which is that, you find something out. So if you find out that it's wrong, well, then you find out the right thing and then print that. You don't print the wrong thing or how you got to the right thing. So with memoir, it's a bit different because you have to sort of hold the reader's hand all the way through. So what you want is the reader to empathize with you. And so you will make mistakes and you'll have to go over them. And there's one, chapter 6, I talk about this very intense story that just didn't work. We got it all wrong. Everything about it, we didn't get the goods. Not all of it wrong, sorry, but at the end of the day, investigative journalism is binary. Either you've got the goods or you haven't. Either you can say what you want to say or you can't. And in the end, you couldn't. So I go through all that and day by day what happened and the things I did, but you don't tell the reader what the end point is yet because they want to be with you. You didn't know 3 weeks before publication what the end point would be. So nor should the reader. So you want them to share your mistakes. You want them to share your misunderstandings. You want them to empathize with decisions you made that maybe were the wrong ones. And hopefully they'll understand why you made them based on the book they've read so far. That's a really interesting concept for me. It's very much non-journalistic, but it's also to actually write that. I think that means you've got to go back in time and reflect yourself and really understand what happened. And okay, yes, that was a mistake. That's a bad thing that I did or whatever. But these were the reasons I did that. And yes, they might be bad reasons, but they make sense. And the megaphysicist in me is craving that sort of logic. Or the rationality as to, okay, I did this because I chose this path because I chose to do the story this way because, and I chose not to publish this because, and that was the right decision in the end in that case. So sorry, I ramble a little bit, but that's that process has been really wonderful.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I imagine when, you're a journalist and you're just, like you said, always go, right? So you're just cranking out stories. And I imagine you probably wrote multiple books worth of words during that time, right? And I also imagine you could crank out a piece relatively quickly. But the way you describe with my own experience writing memoir, it can be, granted, I wasn't a journalist before, but it can be emotionally taxing and really hard to do sometimes. And so have you found that it's more of a struggle to get the words, or do you feel them just sometimes just pouring out of you because you've been sort of like stewing on this stuff for years?
What I've found, so the latter very much so. The words are easy in a way. The words are the easiest bit. What's hard is the going over and understanding, obviously, literally what words to put down and understanding. So I've been very meticulous over the years. Like have every message, every WhatsApp message or iMessage or text message or email from this entire decade. So the process I sort of go through is, okay, I'm going to start on chapter X, which is about 2013, for example. Okay, let's just spend a day and just go through everything, just absolutely everything. And it will take a long time. And in that time, I'll find things I've forgotten. I didn't remember that person I had a relationship with said that to me. I don't think that was right at the time, but now I realize it was. And she was right about that. And that's what didn't work out and stuff like that, which is obviously emotionally taxing. Or this story I mentioned, you know, so we actually published one story on BBC Panorama, which is sort of the UK's 60 Minutes in 2014. A story that I didn't think was quite there. And when that came out, I thought, you know what, I still didn't want to think about it. Let's forget about the whole thing and just move on. I'd actually called up the producer at midnight the night before, before it aired, and said, look, I don't think we've got the goods here. He said, don't worry about it. BBC lawyers have been over it. It's fine. I think, you know what, fine. Let's just drop it. Let's drop the whole thing, Girish, and move on with your life. And it's only 7 years later, I've actually gone through all the emails, gone through the evidence we had, and drawn my conclusion about that. And said, actually, no, we didn't have it. I was right. And I should have insisted. But I didn't. And so be it. And that's the lesson learned. That took a lot of effort to both emotionally, literally going through things emotionally, and okay, you know, what else did I get right or wrong? And in a way, I'm a bit scared of writing the next few chapters. I'm always a bit scared of going into a chapter because who knows? Maybe I'm going to find something out that I did completely wrong and I hadn't realized yet. It's sort of easier to go back over a relationship 5 years ago or a story that went wrong 8 years ago because I've moved on from there. I'm happily married. I've done better stories since. Maybe I'm going to find something else. So maybe the next few chapters will be even harder, but I hope not. But yeah, that's the hard thing. Actually, the writing, I've actually found quite easy. And I found very fun. I mean, yeah, that background as a journalist who was just pumping stuff out has really helped with that. And yeah, it's not always perfect. And actually, the first draft that I show the editor is generally just a dump of my thought, well, not my thoughts, but the chronology and so on. And then we work out, you know, how to make it flow and what to what to keep, what to cut, what to have to massage it into an actual a narrative that works. And then she sort of told me what that chapter was about, and we work on that, which is, yes, it's been such a great process, but the difficult bit has been the reflection. And I think I don't want to write a bad memoir. I want to write a good memoir. And to do that, I've really got to go deep and be honest and be vulnerable about these things. There's no point. This is not just a swashbuckling book about all the adventures I went on, how I overcame, problems with the industry and problems with Venezuela and war and all these things. It's meant to be a really deep look at these things, both for me and also the people I cover. Of course, it's not just the backdrop to my story is covering humanitarian crises, which is obviously interesting in itself, and getting those stories across.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think the part you mentioned about, like, I can relate to the part you mentioned more about going through like all the, you have all the messages saved. I mean, I've done with my memoir somewhat similarly, like there's pictures with timestamps and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was on a call with some other folks that are writing memoirs, and they're all women, oddly enough, but they were all older, and they're writing about stories. Like one woman's, or a bunch of people were writing about things that happened like 20 years ago. And one woman was writing about something that happened 50 years ago. And I was like, I don't know if I'd be able to keep everything, keep track of everything. But like your experience and mine, we can literally go back and go, oh no, this happened before that because I have the timestamps on these things or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting thing when it comes to memoir, because memoir is, it's not like, a historical account of what happened necessarily. It's your experience, as you mentioned, right? So it's seeing these things through the lens of how you experienced it. And maybe how the events happened is maybe not exactly, the order that things happen in isn't as important as to like what your experience was. But so that's really fascinating.
And we prioritize certain things. We maybe try to suppress certain memories as well, so maybe a relationship, the thing that person was saying to me, or actually a story, a piece of evidence which didn't quite work. You sort of forget about that one a little bit, or forget about a conversation that didn't fit your narrative. Of course you do over 5-10 years. And then part of, I think, doing this memoir well is wrestling with that and saying, not literally, but looking back at the messages, this person said this, or I found this piece of evidence. It would take me 5 years to realize that I should have looked deeper into that, and that was right and I was wrong, or whatever. But there's also part of me which likes the logical consistency of that as well. It's to say, this is what I thought. It was wrong, but it's because I'd suppressed this, or whatever it might be. I think wrong. It's not like everything I did was a mistake. I think it's just those are the things I have to grapple with. The things that weren't mistakes, well, they're pretty easy to write. It's fun. It's, you go back through messages and you get reminded of things, and it's a wonderful romp through whatever story it was I was covering or whatever I was doing. But the things that really make you stop and think and are the bits where mistakes happened, I really found my mood in writing this stuff has been affected by the chapter I'm on and what I was going through at that time. Because I spent the first couple of days, just as I said, going through messages and getting myself back to that place and with those people I was with and the people I was speaking to every day. Obviously it was a happy, great time. Then sometimes I'm nostalgic for that. If it was a really sad time, then maybe I mirror that emotion. So that's been really interesting and maybe problematic for the people who found me. But no, it's been a wonderful thing to do. And at the end of every chapter, I've closed that chapter, which is such a wonderful thing to do. It's and I'm hoping that, as I write the last lines of the book, I'll sort of be closing up that period for myself. And that's ultimately why I'm doing this. It's not, this isn't going to be a bestseller or, make me tons of money. But it will allow me to move forward. That's the primary purpose of this.
Yeah, that's probably the best mindset to go into it with. But you tap into how writing can be, especially writing like deeply personal things can be very like therapeutic. And I actually came across this quote just yesterday, which resonated so much with me. Actually, my wife shared it with me. She heard it on a podcast. The quote is, "You might as well start by confessing your deepest shame. Anything else would just be exposition." Which I really loved that, right? And I thought that was so relevant to people trying to really dig deeply into what they've gone through.
That really is, that's a great line. But yeah, that's I really had to attack. And I guess, as I said, the therapist without tact, stroke service be really, really wonderful with that. And maybe she has got tact, I joke, but not as much tact or training as a therapist, but it's really, really helped with that. And she's asked me those questions and said, no, point blank, and you've got to answer this. Otherwise, it's going to be just a one-dimensional memoir. What were you thinking then? What do you think now about it? What would you learn over the later years, and how would you learn these things? I think that, and that's something that I now much more appreciate when I read memoirs. There's a lot of journalistic memoirs out there. There's a handful that are very, and I'm actually trying during this process now not to read any of them because I don't want to. Basically, I've got a good thing going at the moment. I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to start emulating something or getting scared off by something else that I read or think, oh, mine's crap or mine's brilliant or whatever it might be. So I'm actually trying not to read them. But a lot of journalistic memoirs, sadly, are sort of a bit of a rock through people's lives and look how great I am, or how brave I was. It's essentially just a means to move forward in their career, which, there's nothing wrong with that per se. But I'm not sure that's that. I mean, if that were my aim, that would be probably quite easy to do, but wouldn't really be helping me in any way. Also, because I'm not necessarily keen to go back to journalism or anything like that. So this is really about closure, finishing up that period. So I like that. I like that question most.
Yeah, and I think what's important about it is, like you mentioned, recognizing that you did make some mistakes and maybe you were a little naive or you just sort of, fell into those I don't know if I want to call it like a trap or like a someone saying like, well, this is the way we've always done it, or like we have a deadline, and you being a little bit more naive and not going, you know what, putting your foot down and and saying I don't feel good about this. But like I think those are the things that can make people really, really, like latch on to you as a character, if you will, as the protagonist,
and understand you,
empathize with you,
Yeah, and it was. I mean, I also, it's also the other way around too. When we talked about the whole late payment or low payment stuff at the start, and I was angry about that on Friday, but I didn't quite understand the depth of my anger. I couldn't really put it into a bigger picture. Like I mentioned the Iraq trip, I was angry about that at the time, but I still didn't quite understand. I didn't quite know what to do with that anger. Was I right? Was I not right? How was I? Whereas now I'm actually able to step back from it and actually, in a way, I'm not more angry about it now, but more certain that, I was right about that. The thing that happened was wrong. And I'm able to say that now in an articulate, non-angry way. which obviously is much more powerful than just ranting. And I don't want this to be a rant at all. So, it goes both ways. There's my mistakes, but it's also the mistakes of the industry, and obviously then the wider mistakes of, the governments and the people that cause these issues that I covered.
I think that's maybe a misconception some people have about memoir is that it's, could be, it's therapeutic and cathartic for the writer. Yes. But it doesn't mean you're just ranting or getting things off your chest.
Good.
Oftentimes, like a lot of time has passed and you've had time to process it, and then you can sort of take yourself back to that, but you now have some sort of learning or, realization from that experience.
Yeah. It might be a realization about yourself in that, I could have done this, or it's that trait in me that maybe came from my childhood that meant I did this, and that was the right or the wrong thing to do. Or it can be actually doubling down on that original opinion you had, which is that no, they were wrong. They completely screwed this up, and this isn't how it should be. But both are really valuable, I think. And obviously the former is really valuable because you can do something about that.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned, like you want to get the book published, but your goal is mostly just to finish the book. But I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, what are your goals for the book? Like,
The goal, what I always wanted to say is that I want to write this book for myself and my wife and, and the people around me. As someone said to me once, it's writing a memoir is basically allows you to have the ability to have a conversation with people about things that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in person for whatever reason. So, in some extreme case, it could be someone who's died. It could be somebody who you're not talking to anymore. It could be someone with whom you just can't really have that conversation. Sometimes I feel my mum doesn't know all the stuff that I thought about, with respect to certainly her own relationship, her own difficult relationship with my father. So it's nice to get that down a little bit, or my editors, whoever it might be. So that's but actually primarily I want this to be for me. So I've always said, look, if I want to pull the plug at any point, where I decide, no, if I decide it's so wonderful, I'm so proud of having written this, it's great, it reflects me, it reflects my last 10 years. But you know what, I don't want to publish it, then that's absolutely fine. I want to hold on to that. So that's really important, because if I weren't doing that, I'd be thinking about the market. Oh, what should I not say? Or if I mention this, then it won't get on the New York Times list or whatever. I don't want to be doing that. I want to write at least the first draft to be my book. Do I want to get it published? Yeah, why not? I think that'd be a great thing to do. I don't know if I have any grand ambitions, in terms of, do I want to, well, I guess what are the options? It could be the book that changes journalism, and makes it this much more meritocratic good thing. It could be the book that helps people understand Venezuela. It could be the book that helps people understand me and a kid growing up, whatever. It could be the book that absolutely no one reads. And all of those are sort of, it's, where it lands will be, somewhere in between all those things, a bit of all of them, hopefully. But I still want to hold on to this thing, a book for me at the moment. And if I decide to publish it, then great, then I'll go down that path and I'll do those things which I can't stand, like marketing and that sort of thing. And I have, I was very reluctant to put it on Substack, but I thought actually I had such good feedback from a couple of people I showed it to, that, actually this might be a nice thing to do. And it might help if I choose to get published, or choose to get an agent to get published. And I've only put the really early bits on. Actually, you'll see on my Substack, I've only got 4 or 5 things out there. All of them are within my first sort of 6 months of journalism over 10 years. So I'm doing it very slowly. It's all one thing a week, and I've got 100,000 words to play with, so I can pick and choose. And we'll see how that evolves. It'll evolve with my own mindset about it, and how confident I get with the book, and how confident I get about saying these things publicly.
yeah, that was actually my other question was about the choice to go on Substack. So, and so are you, I can't really tell. Are you serializing it on Substack, or are you just picking bits that you're like, oh, this could be cool as a standalone?
Picking bits out, and they're drafts. I mean, sometimes it's X's instead of numbers. This is not a perfect final version. It's still publishable, so I'm not just saying things that are not true and then I'll check them later. Sometimes that's the problem. Is obviously journalistic, that's the problem. And if I'm saying anything negative about somebody, I'll request comments and so on. But they're not perfectly written. At the one I put out today, I think some of the tenses were a little bit off, would, was, and so on, next to each other. It's not meant to be perfectly written. It's just meant to get the idea and the flavor of what I'm saying out there. allow me to get some feedback. What do other people think? Have I completely got it wrong? Or other journalists say, well, Girish, that's not how it works in freelance journalism. I don't know what happened to you, but that's not, or whatever. It's nice to get a little bit of feedback, but I'm being slow about that and careful about it because I don't want to just dive in and make it all public yet. Because I'll probably end up changing bits. There'll be bits that I don't want to put in the book. Finally, I'm sure. And bits that I'll cast. And even when I was looking, I think I'm a better writer now as I approach chapter 12 than I was when I approached chapter 2. But that means when I go back to chapter 2, which is where that excerpt came from this morning, it means, oh, that's really badly written and I should do this. But obviously I need to actually get on with chapter 12 and finish the book. So it's a bit of a balance, but I'm enjoying putting it out there. It's not like it's making me tons of money or anything. Handful of people paid, which is really nice. And that's more to support me, I think, rather than to because they're so excited about these extracts. But that's nice as well. It shows that there is interest, and I've had some really lovely feedback, which is great.
Have any of your former colleagues seen it yet? I'd just be curious how like some of the, or like not necessarily colleagues, but just other freelance journalists or stuff.
Yeah, they had. So one actually just read everything I've written, and that's basically the guy who taught me to write and taught me the value of writing, the Reuters journalist I mentioned a little bit earlier. And he's been very pleasantly and surprisingly impressed. He said, I don't think he was expecting quite so. I think the editors really helped me shape this into something more than just Girish has robbed through the last 10 years. So that's probably what he was expecting, and frankly, what I would have expected. So it's better than that, which is great. And that's great. And it's nice for him to see it. And also see how he helped shape this whole period as well. I've shown a few other people. My wife has seen, she's a journalist too. And a few other freelance journalists, but not too many people. Not too people have seen the whole thing. But the feedback I've had has been great, and hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, I mean, I could see some people who are in the industry. Well, some people could maybe not be happy about certain parts, but then
of course,
but there could be other people that go like, yes, this is a problem, and can onto it.
It's actually going to. I mean, there are elements of it that are going to. Even today's one, I had to. Was it 4 or 5 companies I got no comment from? I had New Statesman, the Financial Times, to be honest, who I talked about their late payments and low payments and stuff. So they're not going to be happy, obviously. But actually, yes, there are elements further in the book and more so towards the end as well, where I do call people out and I do the journalistic thing. I do journalism. I get internal emails. I show things that people don't want to show. That's what journalism is at the end of the day. And they're not going to like that. And there will be lots of people in the industry who won't like it, who won't like how I characterize the way some newspapers or these outlets do journalism, how some journalists work, how it's not always necessarily about the truth and so on. And that's obviously ultimately that's a good thing for that to come out. But it's hard, especially when you're sort of battling against the other people not talking about it and so on. So we'll see. We'll see how I go with that and how it works out.
Cool. Well, we're coming up on the hour here, so I wanted to respect your time, but also if maybe quickly you can tell people where to find this writing and find you online.
Thank you. Well, that's very kind. So the Substack that I put stuff out on is always go. It's alwaysgo.substack.com. And always go, like I say, it's just this mantra, just go and see and do. And actually, I approached that later in the book and talked about places where I didn't always go and mistakes I made. Alwaysgo.substack.com. And then on Twitter and so on, I'm there with I'm sure when I got my Gmail account many, many years ago, I think Girish@gmail.com was probably available, but because I was 15, 16, I chose Master Girish at gmail.com. So that is also my Twitter handle and everything else. And that's a thanks to Run DMC. So you don't know Jam Master J. Jam Master Girish is where I am on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time, and this was a really fun chat. And
thank you.
Maybe we'll have you on again later when it's coming time to publish the book or something.
Yeah, I can't even think of that now. But yeah, thank you. It was such wonderful hours talking to you. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Girish.